Welcome to the Word for 2022. Today we're going to be looking at Psalm 27. Everyone has problems. We have financial problems, situational problems, be it at home, school, or at work. We have emotional problems, whether it's worry or stress or fear. But the one thing that everyone seems to have in common is people problems, and sometimes they can be the worst. Here in Psalm 27, David's people problems get progressively worse. In verse 2, David says, "When evil men advance, and then when my enemies attack, and then though an army besiege me, and though war break out against me." It starts with men, and then enemies, and then an army, and then all-out war. David's people problems seem to be compounding, and it's overwhelming. I want you to notice, though, in verse 2 as you're reading this psalm, that David doesn't say if, but when. We are going to have problems with people. Why? Because people are imperfect, so we're going to have problems. There's misunderstandings. There's going to be different desires or agendas that people have, and self-centeredness. But David says, despite all of that, in verse 3, my heart will not fear, David says. Even then, my heart will be confident. How can David say amongst people problems that he doesn't have fear and he's confident? The answer is in verse 1. David starts out this psalm by saying, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. The Lord is the stronghold of my life." When trouble comes, especially people trouble, it's not just enough to know about God, but we need to know God, have a personal relationship with Him. David reiterates this in verse 4. David says, "One thing I ask of the Lord, and this is what I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze upon the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple." David's desire was to seek a person, God Himself. He wasn't seeking an answer to a problem or a rescue from a problem, but he wanted to be in God's presence. For David, God wasn't just for emergencies or when the bottom drops out or when trouble hit, but David, he had a relationship with God 24/7. In verse 8, David even says, "My heart says of you, seek His face. Your face, Lord, I will seek." In other words, David was saying, as long as I have you, that is all that I need. In verse 10, David continues and he says, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will rescue me." David knew that God's eye was upon him and that God had created him. In Psalm 139, verse 13, David said, "You created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made." David knew the truth that he was created by God. We need to understand that truth is not predicated by popular opinion or majority rules. Politics, pressures within and without, that doesn't matter because truth comes from the Lord. And God in His Word has made it very clear that life begins at conception. We also need to understand that forgiveness is available. Healing is found in Jesus. But God wants His church, His people, to stand for life. So David says again in verse 10, "Even though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." In this psalm, in verses 1 through 6, David's declaring what he knows about God. Then in verses 7 through 13, he declares what he needs. It's a prayer before the Lord. But then the very last verse, verse 14, David says, "I will wait." Now the word wait literally can be translated to twist, to stretch, or to braid, as in the making of a rope. David says, wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart and wait for the Lord. In the midst of lots of people problems all around him, David is saying, I will wait. Now waiting on the Lord, it's not just sitting doing nothing. It's not sitting in a chair killing time. Rather, the biblical understanding of waiting is to rest in God's presence, to actively listen to His voice, and to trust that He sees, that He understands, that He is watching everything that's going on, and that He will act at the right time. There is learning in the waiting. That's the biblical understanding of the word wait. We're learning more about ourselves as we wait, and we're learning more about God as we're waiting upon Him and as we're in His presence. For David, as he's writing this psalm, there is a storm raging all around him. Hell is literally breaking loose all around him. But David is saying, I am going to wait on the Lord. I'm going to rest in His presence. I'm going to trust in His love and in His power, and I'm going to wait to see the goodness of the Lord. Psalm 27, it's a great instructional psalm for us as we too deal with people problems. Thank you for joining the Word for 2022.